What's going on, Cardinals fans, and welcome in to today's edition of Card Sub 365, powered by Gray Bar and sponsored by DraftKings. The crown is yours. I'm Brenden Schaeffer along with Mike Claiborne. Claibs, how are we doing today, my friend?
I'm doing well. Now we have one of the few losses on the schedule out of the way. I'm looking forward to tonight. Well, I was until I realized who was pitching.
You know,
Kryptonite Kyle Hendricks. He's pitching
hey,
tonight, but I'm doing well. I can't complain. We have baseball. It's now April, and I'm a believer that we should not be playing baseball in the month of March, especially in cities like St. Louis. If you want to do that, play them in either warm weather cities or dome cities. The whole schedule should rotate into that. And I'm sure somebody will be bent out of shape by it, but I think it's better for the game because if you look around, the attendance isn't really great anywhere right now. Even we have teams that have home openers. Nobody's doing a lot right now.
that's kind of interesting too, because normally the Cardinals have historically preferred to start on the road, Claves,
Yeah.
because you maybe get a little better weather at Busch Stadium. And obviously, topic of conversation was last night's pretty low attendance, and you've got all the factors that lead to that. But I'm curious off the top for your thoughts on that, Claves, before we get into some of our other topics today.
Well, the attendance last night, I wasn't really surprised when you think about inclement weather. I mean, it was pretty chilly last night. A team other than Mike Trout, most people couldn't name four guys who came up through their organization.
Yeah.
It's early in the year. We don't see the Angels very often. I mean, there are a lot of factors that went into it. I'm not going to throw in the women's great final eight. That doesn't really come into play here. I just think it was one of those nights where, again, you look around the league. I don't know if anybody really had them knocking the doors down trying to get in and watch baseball because I think a lot of times the weather has a lot to do with it.
Yeah,
And you
and
still
we
have school
definitely
in.
Yeah, in school, and it's a Monday, and you mentioned the opponent. So I think it's one of those things that maybe we're not too surprised by early on, but as the weather warms up, if we see the Cardinals playing the type of baseball, especially that they did over the weekend, I think you may end up seeing that attendance start to turn as fans. There was some skepticism this offseason with a quiet winter. And if fans look at the beginning and say, all right, this is a brand of baseball that I want to support, do you see it the same way, Claves, that it could
Yeah,
turn around in short
I think
order?
so. Because really this team didn't have a personality going into this season. And normally the Cardinals have had players they brought in the offseason. So you were looking forward to seeing what they were able to do. So the common fan would say, well, I've seen these guys before, but you haven't seen them in this environment where this is going to be a situation where we're going to have a reasonably set lineup. There'll be some guys that have come in because of a lefty or maybe who've had success against someone. So when you think about how it looked last year compared to this year, I'm looking forward to seeing what Lars Nootbaar can do healthy. And obviously he's gotten off to a good start. I'm looking forward to seeing Victor Scott have the ability to get on base in different ways. And we saw what he can do when he does get on base. And just overall watching guys, and I think really one of the keys is while he hasn't hit yet, I think Wilson Contreras is one of the ones you really ought to keep an eye on because in that position that he's 30 home runs, in my opinion, maybe even more.
Yeah, the Cardinals certainly expect more from Wilson still over the season. Mason Wynn, obviously, in a similar boat right now. And we'll
Yeah.
talk about the Kyle Hendricks matchup tonight because that's
Do we
obviously
have
been a
to?
tough. We've got to address it, I think, at least briefly. But let's first talk about last night's game a little more, Claves. I want to get a couple of reactions from you on some moments that stood out for people. And if anybody has questions, you can subscribe to Sports Hub STL and get your thoughts into the live chat in short order. Let me ask you, though, about Mason Wynn, Claves, because it's been a sluggish start to the season. And he said last night after the game, he knows that this is going to turn for him. There was a moment, though, where you could have made a case for a left-on-right matchup with Nolan Gorman off the bench in the 10th inning last night. I'm curious if you saw it that way and how that one played out for you.
Well, obviously it's an option, but this is your guy. This is Mason Wynn who came through for you last year on a number of occasions. He didn't have a good spring up to his standards. Obviously, he's gotten off to a tough start. I don't think you walk away from a guy this early in the year because he's going through a slump. And you had options. You could have moved Donovan the third short, and you could have brought in Gorman. I mean, the option was there, but I think the bigger picture is letting him play through it and not showing any lack of confidence in him. He's your guy. I mean, he's your guy so much that you don't really have another natural shortstop on your team. So it's a situation where yesterday was one of those nights. I'd be willing to venture that's going to come up again somewhere during the course of the season, and I'm sure the results will be different.
And we are getting, because this is an afternoon show, Claibs, at times we'll have the lineups come in while we're on the air, and we are seeing, according to MLB.com, no Wilson Contreras in the lineup tonight against Hendricks. Ollie getting some more lefties in that lineup. Burleson's going to play first base and bat second. Gorman in there as the DH. So they're going to sell out to try to see what they can do against Kyle Hendricks tonight and maybe get a blow for Wilson Contreras. Another topic I want to ask you about, Claibs, that's reflected in today's lineup is Pedro Paez will be doing the catching behind the plate with Matthew Liberatore pitching. I want your thoughts on the decision there last night to see Ivan Herrera removed for defensive purposes at the point in the game where he was. Obviously, the Cardinals had that slim lead at the time. The thinking is we need our defense and our hands team out there.
Yeah.
But then the spot in the lineup does come up a couple of times, and obviously in a key moment there in the ninth inning. But we've seen, for better or worse, and I think it is kind of worse so far, the throwing has not really upgraded for Herrera the way I think the Cardinals were maybe hoping they would see after an offseason of emphasis on it.
I thought it was slightly better since the season started. I know in spring training it wasn't anywhere where you thought it was going to be, and I know he worked on it a great deal in the offseason. So you have to wonder at some point, does it start to wear on you where you're too mechanical? I mean, when you look at his mechanics, footwork is maybe a hair slow. Maybe his exchange is not what you want it to be, but the only way you can get better at it is continue to try and work on it. Now, this is a guy that'll come early and work on just that before anybody gets to the ballpark. And at some point, it'll have a different look to it. But I really understood why they did it. And, you don't normally see a catcher come in to replace another catcher late in the game. But, it's a small lead. You're trying to keep it close, and you think defense is going to win out in that situation. And you're hoping that if the inning goes well, Paez doesn't even hit. But it didn't work out that way. And let's take this into account. The day before, he was pretty good at the plate. So it would be different if he had been struggling, but the day before, he was really good. So you were thinking maybe we can get something to roll into the next day. It just didn't happen.
It just didn't happen. And again, we're going to, micromanage a lot of these decisions because there's 162 of these, but at times you understand that, that the process is going to be a little more important than that day's result. You can get your comments in, as always, into the live chat here on Sports Hub STL, Cards Hub 365, presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. I want to ask you, Claibs, about a topic that has come up earlier today. Lance Lynn announcing on his wife's podcast that he is retiring as a Major League Baseball pitcher. Of course, the season's begun, and he said, well, they're playing baseball. I'm here on the couch, and that's where I'm going to stay. What are your thoughts hearing that news, assuming, of course, it's not an April Fool's prank, because he was pretty good last year for the Cardinals, but we also know Lance Lynn, dealt with some injuries and grinded through that season as much as he did to perform for the Cardinals in what looks like was going to be his last campaign in MLB.
Well, you know what? If this is it for him, kudos to Lance Lynn and what he's meant to the game, certainly to the Cardinal organization and other teams that he's pitched for. But, it comes to an end for everyone. And obviously in this situation, maybe he didn't get the look that he was looking for. Maybe he didn't get the offer he was hoping for. And just to come back and pitch just for the sake of pitching. And if you don't think you're in a good situation, then I don't blame him. He's made good money in his career. And, it's one of those situations where you'd like to end on a high note. But, if you look at this game, Brendan, very seldom does a guy have a chance to end on his terms. And what I mean by that is how many guys end up winning the last game they ever play. And it's one of those situations where in this case, it didn't work out. Listen, Lance Lynn's going to be all right. Whether he decides to cross the street and get in the media business, I think Lance Lynn would be an interesting coach. I think he'd be even more enticing on a college level. He has so much knowledge in being able to teach the game. And I'm of the belief now, if you don't get these guys early, If you don't have a chance to have an impact on them early, by the time they get to AAA or whatever, it's too late. They already have it made up in their mind. They have multiple gurus that are talking to them about this and that. He's a guy that I would want on the ground level as far as instructing pitchers. And I think he'd be good at it. But he has options. And whatever option he chooses, I'm sure he'll be successful with.
So, Claibs, I'm going to throw a question your way that I asked Randy Carricker this morning. Is Lance Lynn wearing a red jacket someday? What's that conversation look like to you?
I wouldn't say first ballot, but I think he's certainly a guy that's got to be in the conversation for what he meant to St. Louis. Now, remember, he pitched in some other places, and, he had his highs and lows there. But I'm of the belief that he's probably in the conversation, but I'm not on that committee. I don't put anybody on it. I don't take anybody off of it. But certainly Lance had some good runs in St. Louis when he was wearing a Cardinal uniform.
He did, and you look at some of the stats in St. Louis, a career 3.4 ERA, more than 1,000 innings, 1,000 strikeouts, and obviously was part of some pretty successful teams, especially in that first go-around with St. Louis. And I joked this morning, is maybe the only Cardinal pitcher, or is he the only pitcher in MLB history to show up on the mound and have his manager ask what he's doing there? Why are you here, Lance Lynn, in the famous words of Tony La Russa?
Here's something else. You rolled out some numbers about his career in St. Louis. Think about how many other guys have those sort of numbers for their time in St. Louis. We see guys come and go, but Lance, you don't stumble onto the numbers he has. You had to obviously be good enough to be around that long. So maybe that puts him in certainly not only in the conversation, but certainly, as Tony La Russa would say, tied for first as far as candidates are concerned.
Let's jump a little bit into the comments here, Claibs. We got a question about Mason Wynn and his performance last year, with Sound of Silence asking, do you feel that Wynn's performance last year was not the expectations of the type of hitter that we should expect? We talked about feeling like Mason Wynn is going to bounce back, but what do you think he could settle into being as a hitter? Not to overreact to 4 games, but how do you view that as far as the kind of hitter he can be? Obviously, right now down in the 9-hole for the Cardinals.
I think it's early to even put a tag on him, to be honest with you. He had reasonable success in the minors. And if you recall, Brendan, last year going into spring training, everybody was wondering, is he going to hit? Because when he was called up in September the previous year, or early and late the year before, he didn't really hit a lot. His defense kept him in the lineup, but they wanted him to go through that. So when he came to spring training, he understood what the big leagues was like, and he was able to adapt. So this is just a part of the process of, do you call it sophomore slump? I don't know. Again, it's 4 games. And, we've all obviously broken down what's wrong with his swing. He's overswinging. He's not doing this. Okay, we get all that. And I'm sure there are people smarter than us that have already witnessed what's going on, including Mason Wynn. So the question is, how do you get out of it? Well, if we knew that, you and I wouldn't be doing this. They would be paying us absorbent amounts of money on how to figure it out. But the thing is, Mason Wynn's a very coachable player. This isn't a guy who has this posse of people who are all trying to tell him what to do. He's gone through this before. I remember last year in spring training, he wanted to hit for a little bit more power. In his stance, he was a little bit more wide open. He was a little bit more spread out. Once he wasn't having the success he thought he should, he went back to his double-A swing, which really made him a guy that they put on the radar. So maybe he goes back to the things he knows he's comfortable with and successful with. And now the teams have a book on him. How do you make that adjustment compared to what they saw last year?
I've got a topic that I definitely want to make sure to get your thoughts on, Claibs. And I don't even want, I'm not even well, here's all I'm going to say. Torpedo bat. I need Mike Claiborne's reaction to the torpedo bat.
Pin on the grenade. Put it right here in my sweater.
You collect yourself.
Let me ask you this. I'll ask you this question. If the Cleveland Guardians were having this sort of success with a torpedo bat, do you think it would be front page discussion?
I do not. I think it's because the New York
Cincinnati
Yankees.
Reds were doing this.
How about the D-backs?
It would warrant this sort of time in our
Yeah.
conversation. Now, I don't want to exclude the situation totally. Obviously, it's something, ironically, that had been around for a while.
Yeah.
And did the Yankees sit on this until the season started? And were they using these bats in the cage? Because I didn't hear a word about it in spring training. Did you?
I did not personally, and I
Okay.
don't know the extent to which other teams might have had access or known about it coming up. No.
It's kind of like the puck bat of 3 or 4 years ago, where all of a sudden a guy has success with it, and they're out in the forest chopping down trees just to have a handle. So I think it's more of an item that, because it's new to us, we think it's a new fad, and it might be. But remember this: you still have to make contact. You still have to put bat on ball. So while this may give some a slight advantage, let's not get carried away here on how it's going to revolutionize the game, because pitchers still have to make pitches and hitters still have to make contact.
That's absolutely true. And I wonder the extent to which this ends up taking off. If it goes more the way of the puck knob, where you go, okay, some guys may try it out as a trend, but then they may go back to their original, or if this is one of those where enough guys, maybe those guys too that hit it, maybe not on the sweet spot enough times. Jazz Chisholm was, a beneficiary of that, because if he's getting, jammed more often, now suddenly those jams are turning into base hits. If enough of those guys have it fit their style of play, maybe that's what could give the torpedo bat some staying power. But they do look hilarious. I mean, optically, they look funny.
I'm going to tell you something. And you weren't even around when this was going on. When Luke Rock was playing in the 70s, he was one of the first guys. He came back from Japan, and the top of the bat was concave, where they were trying to move more of the mass toward the middle of the bat. So it doesn't have the same look that it had when Lou was using it, but the concept had been around for a while. It took somebody from MIT to polish it up a little bit, and maybe the configuration is slightly different. But this concept had been around for, let's say, 50 years.
Yeah, and it's just, one of those things that you somebody tries it first, and then you say, oh, maybe that's something I should be doing. And different guys will have their preferences. I imagine you'll see some guys try it and not like it and go, it throws me off.
We're all guys. Baseball players are certainly creatures of habits. This is a fad industry that we're in, and you pick the sport. If it works for one or two guys and they see it and they start to talk about it and it's different, and I don't care what it is, you can pick the sport. If it works for a handful of people, then everybody else thinks they need to do it. And maybe we're seeing that here in baseball. And I'm sure the pitchers union there's going to be some it's just something we can't handle. Sure you can. This is a game of adjustments. And if you don't adjust, then you're not here. So some people are going to have success with it. And I agree with you. Some guys are going to go worse, go in the other direction, because they think it's the bat that's the problem. No, it's not the bat. It's you. So let's take that into account. You still have to play. You still have to swing it. You still have to see it. And you still have to make contact.
I love it. Cards Hub 365 is powered by Gray Bar, and Sports Hub STL's content presented to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours, and March may be over, but this is no fooling. If you're struggling to choose which team will pull off an upset in college basketball, forget about the teams. All you need to focus on are the player stats to rack up big cash prizes with DraftKings Pick 6. And when it comes to massive payouts, DraftKings dunks all over the competition. Pick 6 is available in most states, including Missouri, California, Texas, Georgia, and more. And you just track your picks for a shot to win huge cash prizes. It really is as simple as that. So download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code STL Sports. That's code STL Sports for new customers to play $5. Get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
What he said, exactly right. All right, I think we do, Joe, have an opportunity here to show the lineup for tonight. As it is, I think it's like Mayweather McGregor, Claibs. You've got Kyle Hendricks v. Brant Brown and his new philosophy as the Cardinals hitting coach. Can he be the solution, as the Cardinals have for years struggled against Kyle Hendricks? What do we look at and like about this lineup tonight as Ollie Marmol puts lefties all at the top, almost daring the opposing manager to take Kyle Hendricks out early and put one of those lefty relievers in there? I think that's kind of a fun little quip.
Well, I think it is. And, if you look at Hendricks' record, his career, March and April have not been good to him. So
Right.
maybe you can get him early, and maybe he goes through the lane twice, maybe. But here's the thing about this, and logic says Ollie's lineup is a good one. Hasn't Kyle Hendricks seen lefties before in his career? I mean, think how many times people have stacked the lineup against him, and he still has reasonable success. I mean, he's a plus 500 pitcher in his career.
Yeah.
But obviously he's on the Cardinals. He truly has pay. I mean, the ownership group of the Cardinals is obviously the DeWitt family and some other local investors. and Kyle Hendricks has to have a small piece of what he's been able to do over the course of his career. But now he's in a different uniform. Maybe that changes things a little bit. And here's the other thing. Other than Nolan Arenado, this lineup that you see, none of these guys have had more than 10 at-bats against Hendricks. So it's not like he's seen a bunch of guys that he's been able to face over the course of his career. So maybe that changes things. I know Burleson has had reasonable success against him in a small sample size. So maybe that's something that you look at and you try and just say, hey, look, let's just go out here and swing the bat. We're swinging the bat well. We've had 10 hits in every game. So let's not let one guy stop what we've been able to amass so far.
And you know what? I am looking at those career numbers. If Ollie Marmol gets into a pinch, Sonny Gray 1-for-1 with 2 RBIs against him. So that may be a direction that
would be a good idea if Sonny Gray still had a bat.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody has a name on the bat. I don't know if Sonny even has any of those near him at this point.
Yeah, and you can hardly blame him. But to your point, career splits for Kyle Hendricks are not all too drastic in one direction or the other. He's allowed a 724 OPS against left-handed batters for his career. It's 667 against righties. That's not particularly drastic or more damaging, but I do think you're almost enticing Ron Washington to say, all right, if I can go to one of my many lefty relievers the third time through the order, that may be a way to only see a handful of innings against Hendricks. But on the other side, Claibs, the Cardinals are going to throw Matthew Liberatore out there after he really did earn his. I can't wait to watch him pitch.
Yeah, I mean, watching him in the spring, and let's go back to last year when he had to go multiple innings. His mound presence and just his command just said, I dare you to hit me. And, I mean, he really mixed up his pitches well, and he had a very solid spring, beyond solid, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do 2 lanes through, maybe 3. And as you know, he's a guy that can pitch all day. I mean, he's not a guy that you have to baby at this point. So while I know it's early and the weather may have a little bit of a factor on how loose he can stay, I'm anxious to see what he's able to do against a reasonable lineup. We watched the Angels last night. They got a little help, but when you look at their lineup, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. And they're trying to figure some things out. And just in talking around Washington, he made a point about spring training yesterday. He said, I like to see my guys get 50, 60 at bats compared to some teams where if a guy gets 35 or 40, then he's good. And I think the difference is now so many guys spend so much time in the cage in the offseason and certainly during the spring. Maybe they feel they don't need as many. I'm always a believer, man, there's nothing like live pitching, especially guys in a different uniform.
And looking at this Angels lineup, not a ton of experience against Matthew Liberatore. Just it looks like about 17 combined at bats. And so they'll get a look at the Cardinal left-hander who really this is an interesting bit of runway for Libby. When you look at and talked about ways things went for him last year, it seemed as though at times the Cardinals almost had to trick him into going, hey, you're going to be starting today. We just found out and it's time to go. And that would almost lock him into a mentality where he would perform almost better than anybody could expect in those spots. Now it's been a spring where he's had that attack mentality. They try to bottle it for him. It seems like when he's in relief, it's always been a simple factor. Now, can you do that in the rotation? Can you do it the second and third time through? But Claibs, if the answer ends up being yes over the next 6 weeks, 2 months, as we see Libby with this opportunity, the Cardinals may have found an answer for 2026 as they're looking into the long-term ramifications of the rotation. I think that's why it's so important that he gets an opportunity like this now to see what you might have in him for not just this year, but beyond.
I would agree. And, he's on audition like a lot of players are. Again, I think the maturity factor for him has grown exponentially over the last, let's say, year and a half. In just how he's approached this thing. He's filled out. He understands the game a lot more. I really think one of the keys for him is, relievers have this tendency to show you everything early. If Matthew Liberatore wants to be around by the 6th or 7th inning, that doesn't mean he's got to unload the closet in his repertoire in the first inning. Relievers have that mentality. Now you're a starter. Let's do a little this. Let's do a little that. And I think when you touched on Pages being in the lineup tonight, I think that's one of the reasons why he's in the lineup, because making sure that a guy doesn't fall in love with a certain pitch so much to the point where teams start to sit on it the second and third time around.
Couldn't agree more with that. And Libby will be the 5th starter that we'll see. We did see Steven Matz in relief. And if he can end up with a solid outing tonight, you could say one turn through that the Cardinals were ultimately pretty successful. I'll be looking forward to seeing that one down at Busch Stadium. Claibs, I'll catch you there tonight, I imagine.
Bring a sweater or a wrap. You're going to need it.
Bring us. If they open up those windows in the press box, I'm going to.
They wouldn't dare open those windows upstairs. You know how
might be a little sour.
Are, man. Come on.
Cards
Nobody braves the element. Nobody braves the elements anymore. And I readily admit we had our window closed as well. So,
I don't really blame you guys, and we'll see what it looks like up there tonight in the press box as we watch the Cardinals take on Kyle Hendricks. Can they solve him this time? And we'll get to have a good look at Matthew Liberatore as well. Card Sub 365. It's powered by Gray Bar, and the content here on Sports Hub STL is brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Claibs, appreciate you. Appreciate all you out there in listener land. Hit subscribe on the channel before you get out of here, and we'll talk to you next time on Sports Hub STL.